But yeah, Jack may come back. But Tom, in lieu of that, or until that happens, you want to ask Zach about his view?
Oh, where did Zach and Jack leave off?
They actually didn't even get it started. It was just going to happen, and he just took off. But he said he
high and by.
Yeah,
high and by.
But he felt bad about it. But he said he's going to try to come back. But it's just starting fresh, man. It could just be completely. I mean, if you want to hear him make an argument, he could do that too. He could just make the argument, and you can interact with that.
Yeah, you can try that. Let's try that.
Well, the argument for God is outside of God's presupposition, or God presupposes his existence, that there is no answer to questions in life without being self-refuting and logically inconsistent, such as objective morality, uniformity and conformity with nature, truth, reason, logic. These are all attributes of God, and apart from God, these things can't exist.
Okay, that sounds like the claim. What's the argument for that?
Well, the argument is in everybody's worldview. What do you believe, I guess? Because I would have to know what you believe, because I don't want to insert a straw man on what you believe. So I am a confessional Lutheran. You can find what I believe in the unedited 1580 Book of Concord, which we just confess is the correct exposition of what the scriptures teach. We believe that the scriptures are valuable, inspired, and inerrant by God, and that they teach the truth. And we, again, as a denomination, we edit that to the 1580 unedited Book of Concord, which was written at the time of Reformation, when Rome and Lutherans kind of had their split. So
yeah, so are you trying to say that the Christian God is true due to the impossibility of the contrary? Is that the idea?
I'm trying to say that the Christian God is true because apart from his existence, there would be no worldview that you see today. You wouldn't be able to account for things in the world as it is now.
Right. In other words, all other worldviews are impossible.
Improbable.
Improbable. Oh, well, then I guess my job's done.
Well, you'd have to actually make the argument.
By your own lights, it's not impossible. It's just improbable.
And
I thought you were going to say that you knew that the Christian God is true in a way that you can't be wrong about it.
I do.
No, you don't.
I do.
You just told me the other worldviews are only improbable, not impossible. In fact, I explicitly asked you if they're impossible, and you said no, they're only improbable. So you've just contradicted yourself.
How so?
Because improbable and not improbable is a direct contradiction.
Okay, but how does that contradict what I stated as objectively true?
Because something can't be impossible and not impossible.
Well, what are you defining as improbable? How are you defining the term?
Excluding impossibility and some sort of probability assignment that's low.
Well, improbable means inauthentic, right?
Well, apparently it doesn't mean impossible, because I asked you if that meant impossible, and you said no, right?
Well, inauthentic and
There's
impossible.
some sort of distinction between impossible and improbable.
Sorry, give me 1 second here. I kind of lost my I hit a button and I'm new to this, so sorry, say that one more time.
I mean, I don't know what else there is to say. I mean, like, maybe you just misspoke, and maybe I just confused what you said.
Well, I'm
Are
saying
all the
other
non-Christian worldviews impossible?
yes, inauthentic, improbable, unexistent.
Well, there you go again, using the word improbable. What's that about?
Well, I define the way I'm using improbable as inauthentic. That is a definition of improbable, is it not?
Inauthentic?
Right.
No, improbable is some sort of probability assignment, right? Of value. And that is not and something that's improbable. It's not impossible, it's just not likely, right?
Well, actually, one of the definitions for improbable is inauthentic. So
And
I guess we have,
what does inauthentic mean?
well, what's authentic? It would be the direct opposite of authentic, right?
Yeah, well, that's not going to help me, and now you have to tell me what you mean by authentic. Now, we already have some sort of issue where your language is like proprietary, all right? You have a very different understanding of improbable that I have. So now it's going to be up to you to explain to me what you mean by this authentic slash inauthentic stuff. And
Well, I
telling me
mean,
that it's the opposite of authentic isn't going to help me, right?
if I concede to impossible just for the sake of continuing the dialogue, so that we're not, that's one thing that I always like to do when I start a debate, except I prep for it first, is I sit down and define my terms, right? So I guess we're in the state right now of defining terms. If inauthentic is a problematic word, then I could just switch to impossible. I don't have a problem with
Oh,
either meaning the same thing.
Oh, okay. Well, it seemed like you had an issue, but okay. So impossible meaning that it's logically impossible that it could be the case, something like that?
Well, could you define what you mean by logically impossible?
Yeah, it contains some sort of contradiction logically.
Right. It would be self-refuting.
Uh, well, when you said right, did you mean that yes, the non-Christian worldviews are impossible, meaning that they contain a logical contradiction?
I mean, they are self-refuting. Right, in the sense
Well,
that
I
they
know
contain.
what I mean by logical contradiction, and I explained to you what I meant, and I know that you heard that. Now, this self-refuting thing is a new term, and last time we had a disagreement in terms, turns out that inauthentic just meant impossible. So in this case, does this new term that you're using, what was it?
Self-refuting.
Self-refuting. Does self-refuting just mean logically impossible?
Well, isn't logically inconsistent at the same time self-refuting? I'm just speaking like hyper clearly because we've already had an impasse in semantics.
Well, I don't know if we have an impasse. I mean, it's like the last impasse was just us using two different words to mean the same thing, right?
Well, I think we're getting down that
So
road with logically inconsistent and self-refuting. They mean the same thing. It's the same. Would you agree with that or no?
by logically inconsistent, do you mean containing a logical contradiction?
Right. I mean, if you're
Okay,
contradicting it,
so we're not at an impasse. We're actually just using the same. We mean the same thing. We're just using different words.
right. Well, semantics, like I said, some things can get lost in semantics. So I want to be real clear on what I'm saying. And I boil that down to the simplest as self-refuting. Would you agree that a logical inconsistency is a self-refutation?
By that you mean a logical contradiction, and like self-refuting meaning like it can't be true because like by definition a contradiction is impossible. Yeah, I think we're on the same page.
Okay.
So the non-Christian worldview is logically impossible, right?
Well, first, before I can engage with you, I would ask, what you actually believe. What is
I
what is your
believe
worldview?
I believe I'm a non-believer in God.
Wouldn't you say that in itself is a refutation, that you believe that you don't believe?
No.
How can a positive in turn make a negative? Because the act of belief in an unbelief is a self-refutation. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, any belief is going to be equivalent to some sort of negative belief, right? Your positive belief in God is going to be equal to a positive negative belief in not God. So we can just dispense with that.
Well,
It's obviously
I'd
possible.
like to hear
You're
that
doing it.
argument,
I'm
but
doing it.
I'd like to hear that argument, how you get to a negative on my belief in God. How does that come to a negative?
It comes to a positive in the negative view, right? So you believe in God, right? Positively. You also positively believe in the negative position, i.e., not God.
I don't believe in i.e. not God.
Yeah, exactly. So now you've answered your own question on how it can be the case that you positively believe in a negative. You just did it.
Yeah, but the thing is I think that's kind of a trap because there's not a belief, because when a belief exists, the non-belief is just not there. There's no such thing. You see what I'm saying?
No,
What I'm trying to articulate is I can't not believe in a non-belief. So you're making the positive a negative, which is
it's not a
a refutation.
non-belief. If you believe positively A, you believe positively not A.
To
I'm
me,
sorry.
that's
You
logical
believe
inconsistency, because mine is a straight line of just belief. There is no negative.
you believe positively not A is false if you believe in A.
But that's a false dichotomy, because there's only A. There is no B. I mean, you're inserting the B. You see what I'm saying?
B wouldn't be a dichotomy. A and not A is a dichotomy. That's true. But
Do you
I
kind of
don't know
grasp
where
my
this.
argument? Or what?
No,
Sorry, go
I
on.
don't. No, I don't.
I cut you off. Go ahead and finish what you said. I don't see where this.
Yeah, I just don't see where this portion is going. I think it felt like we were kind of about to get to some sort of argument for your position that the non-Christian worldview is impossible, right? A non-Christian
Right. So,
world is
like, if
impossible.
if this is a hang up, let's just jump over it. I'm willing to jump over it if you're willing to jump over it. We can just move to the next thing.
Yeah, the next thing would be why?
Objective morality, one reason. What objective justification do you have for a moral standard?
A question or some sort of musing with a question mark at the end is not an argument that's going to support your position.
Well, are you? Would you say that you have a moral code? That you have a vow of ethics?
Is this another question that's supposed to be an argument? I
Well,
can
this is
answer these. I can answer some of your questions.
well, this is why I asked what you
Is
believe,
this
because I believe
necessary? Is this I mean, I'm just wondering Is the asking of these questions necessary for you to support your positive position that the Christian God view, the Christian God world is the only possible world? Is
Do
it
you,
necessary for you to ask me these questions? Are you asking me another question already?
well, the question goes with your question here. Do you believe that you have the correct worldview?
With regards to the Christian God being false, yeah, I do.
But didn't you just ask me a question, then refuting your own statement that asking questions to affirm a positive is not an argument? Aren't you doing the same?
No, I didn't ask you a question in order to support my worldview that the Christian God is false. In fact, you're the one asking the questions, and you're asking me another question.
Well, I was to go with your last question because you're kind of asking me the same question that you're trying to say that I can't ask. But my question would be, again, that's why I need to know what you believe so that I can pick
You
from your
don't.
worldview,
You
right?
don't.
Your statement of faith and show where it's inconsistent. So
Yeah,
again, I mean,
because. Sorry, go ahead.
well, there is such a thing as an objective moral standard. We both agree on that, right? Yes or no?
Why would I agree to that?
Well, because we're engaging, there is a right and a wrong, right? A wrong
In what sense?
in the sense of an objective standard.
With regards to what? Dialogue?
Morality.
Morality? We're engaging in some sort of standard of morality right now?
We are.
Okay, what is that?
A civil conversation.
Well, I
There's
don't see
rules that
how
go.
there's some sort of. Yeah, those rules are just created. The standard is just an agreed upon sort of standard or understanding, such as I talk, then you talk. These are just conversational conventions that we're using. I don't understand what an appeal to any kind of objective morality has to do with anything, or any
So,
reason to believe that conversational dialogues such as this are within the scope of some sort of objective morality.
so you are conceding that there is a standard of morality in this conversation.
I think there's a standard of some sort of like etiquette or conversational standards. Yeah.
I agree. So, what makes that standard objective?
I don't think it is.
And that's the thing. So, if there's no, how can we have a standard if there's no objective standard? If the standard is subjective, why are people always following the same line of dialogue and respectfulness?
They don't. That's why I can
Well,
say, hey,
I mean,
Zach, you, asshole.
you can, but again, you said that in a way that was demeaning, right?
Yeah, that was the purpose of it, to
Right.
illustrate that I'm not following some sort of objective
But
standard.
that just shows that again, your belief isn't lining up with what you say, because if we both can agree that that was demeaning and you concede that that's demeaning, then you're showing to be inconsistent with what you're saying as far as what's coming out of your mouth and what you're actually confessing to be true.
Yeah, how so?
Well, why'd you choose those words and not I hope it rains gold on you, my friend?
Because
Why
those
was that a
are
negative?
because it's understood to be an insult.
Again, according to what standard?
An agreed upon standard, and one we share by using the English language. If I would have said it in another language, presumably it would have been objectively offensive, but you wouldn't have known that, would you?
Well, you're making the assumption fallacy that we agree. You see, an objective moral standard means there has to be an objective. It has to be a concrete certainty. So even though even though you might move goalposts, right? And of an argument, it's this consensus within the entire world where most people know it's wrong to steal, wrong to murder, it's wrong to harm your parents. These are a agreed consensus among all humankind. Would you agree?
It's not a completely agreed upon, no. I mean,
Well, I'm not saying
it's
completely.
widely agreed upon, yeah.
I mean, wouldn't we say it is, though, as far as those things do have punishments? Isn't there an objective punishment for theft and murder? And
No.
you mean that if I murder somebody, the police aren't going to show up at my door and take me to jail?
It depends where you are.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And on a grand scale, you don't think there's an objective standard on that?
No.
Have you ever murdered anybody?
No.
Why not?
Don't want to.
Why not?
Because I don't have the desire. I don't have the desire. I don't have the motivation to do so. I don't have, there's consequences for murder even if I did, et cetera, et cetera.
So we do agree that there are consequences, and consequences must come from an objective moral standard.
False.
In the context of what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to understand your position. I'm trying to understand your position.
The consequences that you're invoking, like being put in jail, is anything but objective. It's subjectively the case, right? That minds come together and they go through some process of deliberation and they come to the conclusion that this is going to be the punishment for murder. What you're describing is a purely subjective process. But I mean, I think that I'm really being a good sport, and I've kind of entertained the like objective morality objection that you've been making. And I maybe am like, I want to kind of like entertain your line of thought. And personally,
I think a good sport too, but I would also say that you've been inconsistent in your argument, because when you say that you haven't murdered, but again, what is your belief? What is your worldview? As far as you believe God doesn't exist, right? And does that mean all gods or my God?
I am not a believer, right?
Right. And we skipped.
If you're talking about the Christian God, then yes, I believe the Christian God does not exist.
Do you believe it? And do you believe all gods do not exist, or just my God?
Well, no, because I got this friend. His name's JJ, and he says he believes in God. And when he says he believes in God, he just means the universe exists, and I believe in the universe, so I believe in that God. But just to go back to what I was saying, look, I'm entertaining a lot of these rabbit trails, and I'm just doing it just because purely I'm trying to be a good sport. However, it is the case, and I think it's only fair for me to ask this question. You're saying that the non-God worldview is impossible, and I really don't think that you need to ask any questions. You require zero feedback from me, presumably, to support your own claim. Now, I've entertained it just out of like
is without asking any questions. You know, and you not at all. I can't follow you around with a video camera for a week. Otherwise, I could easily prove that you're self-refuting in your daily life. And I do think you're being a good sport. Don't get me wrong. I do appreciate you entertaining some of the questions, but there is an objective moral standard. I mean, we both know it's wrong to murder, but you can't give me any objectivities as far as right or wrong. That's just pure chaos. But we don't see that. We don't see plain anarchy worldwide 24/7, 365. We see order.
Tom, I can tap in.
Yeah,
if
because
you don't-
subjective morality works. But look, I mean, like,
You're saying it's subjective, but we all agree on these morals. Where did this agreement come from?
No, we don't all agree.
Look,
Well,
look, I mean,
real quick.
look, just tell me this, and Andrew, I'm going to implore you, like, to help me out here, because I'm like, look, I'm just wondering if it's the case that I must continue to answer questions in order for you to support your position.
Yeah.
If the answer is yes, then I'll just disengage, right?
No, I agree. Let me just say something real quick, Zach, just so what you understand what Tom's saying here. He's saying that, like, if you were trying to make an argument, like this argument is the argument I'm putting for God, and this is the irrefutable argument. Presumably, you could just write that in a book, right? You could just write it down. You don't need
Well,
to ask.
I understand what he's saying, but my thing is I thought maybe we were going to engage a little bit
Oh
more.
no, you
but
will. You will for sure, for sure.
If
No,
he's
he is
going
going
to
to.
turtle, then there's really nothing, because I could just
No.
make a bunch of statements and walk away.
No, I understand, but I think what he wants is what he was hoping is, like, you could do premise, conclusion, something like that, and then you guys could engage.
It doesn't even
But-
have to be in that form. It could be
No, it doesn't.
just a
I
rough
understand.
I mean,
I appreciate you bearing with me, Tom.
Look,
and I get what you're saying, but see, then do we really get anywhere? We're just going to walk away without ever having a dialogue. See, my thing is if I just smash home this, and we both walk away.
Andrew, Chris, love you, buddy, but just
let me finish what I'm saying, because if
let's be respectful. I'm just trying to look. We are vigorously disagreeing, but I just wanted to say
I'm not this, because you're going to say this. I'm going to say this, and we never get anywhere, right? Because we both just turtle. You see what I'm saying? I would rather
well,
have.
I don't know what you mean by the word turtling, right?
Well, I mean, I don't have to answer any questions either, right? So I would just, again, just make the claims, right? And what I hate most about, I mean, you're not an ignorant guy. I can tell by having a conversation, but I have a lot of conversations with ignorant people, and you get done showing them the irrefutability, right? And they go, nah, right? And we can both agree that's ignorance, right? So I usually prefer to engage with people so that we can have a more fruitful conversation. You see what I'm saying? If you would prefer that I just stick to laying down facts, we can do that too. But I usually like dialogue.
Well, I don't think it has to be one or the
right.
other. And in fact, I out of just good faith and respect to you, and just on me knowing that you're Andrew's friend alone, I engage in a lot of your questioning, which I normally wouldn't have thought that it was even appropriate to answer such a relevant.
Well, I
But
appreciate.
I don't think that there can. I don't think that there can't be a dialogue once you give a case for why the not Christian God worldview is impossible to be true.
Well, it depends on what other worldview. Again, there's different arguments formulated for different worldviews. I can prove objective morality. I can prove uniformity and conformity within nature. I can prove, logic, reason, truth. All the tools that you're using now, right? You're reasoning against reason. Does that make sense?
Depends. You mean like hammering a hammer? That's not a contradiction.
Well, reason against reason would be a contradiction, would it not? I think that was a false equivalence. A hammer with a hammer.
I don't really know what you mean by that, but can I maybe get the argument? I mean, you're saying like you need to know something about a worldview, and you kind of alluded to I can show worldview X, Y, and Z are impossible. So it seems like what you're saying is that all the other worldviews, apart from the Christian God worldview, are faulty. They're impossible, right?
Right.
And Van Til says something to that effect, and I assume that you're maybe invoking this directly or indirectly, where he says in a survey of Christian epistemology, the contrary, it is this that we ought to mean when we say that we reason from the possibility of the contrary. The contrary is impossible only if it is self-contradictory when operating on the basis of its own assumptions, right? And so if I understand you correctly, what you're trying to do right now is to explore my own worldview until you have found something self-contradictory within my own assumptions. Is that correct?
Well, that is and it's not. It's not 100% true, but it is true in the sense that, yes, like if you were to refute yourself, which you would eventually do by answering my questions, then I would call it, right? But it's not true.
You would declare that my worldview has been shown to be impossible, correct?
Inconsistent, self-refuting, which is
right. And we have agreed upon earlier that when you say self-refuting and inconsistent, you mean logically impossible because it contains contradiction, right?
correct.
Okay, so let's just like for the sake of argument, let's just say that there's an inconsistency in my worldview. How does that show that it is the case that all non-Christian worldviews are false?
Because they come back to the same core tenets. Only Christianity can account for objective morality or uniformity, conformity in nature. Like the sun.
Well, then you're not sure.
The sun is going to come up tomorrow.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
The sun is going to come up tomorrow. Do you believe that?
Yeah.
It's going to come out tomorrow.
But see, then I would ask you, see, this is where I'd ask, well, why would you believe that? You see what I'm saying? Because that's
just
only
inductively. It's just an inductive inference.
But
see now here's the problem now I'm at. I asked and answered another one of your questions, but like
which I didn't notice. I didn't want to force you into answering that. I just
no, I don't have. I'm going to try to answer them. I'm going to try to answer as many as I can, right? But here's what the problem is, right? Because now I'm saying you want to ask me all the questions to kind of get some kind of contradiction, and then you're kind of like, well, yeah, but I don't need to because the Christian position is the one that's true. And that seems to be what you're saying is you're switching from the impossibility of the contrary to positively like asserting that the Christian worldview is true. And if the Christian worldview is true, therefore all non-Christian worldviews are false. So you now just switched. I don't know if you realize it, but you just switched. And if it's the case that you switched and you're now saying that you're not doing an impossibility to the contrary, now you're in the position where it doesn't matter now for you to ask me any questions. In fact, you're just positively going to reinforce your own position with some kind of argument, presumably. So now that we've established that you've abandoned impossibility of the contrary, now you can just simply give your own argument for the Christian God and why it's necessarily the case.
Well, I find that to be a straw man because that's not what I was doing. I mean, we're kind of dialoguing on multifaceted subjects here, right? Would you agree? Or we just kind of jumped into uniformity?
I mean, you were switching. Nature. Yeah, I agree that you were trying to invalidate non-Christian worldviews, and then you said, and then when I brought up the problem of, well, if you invalidate my worldview, there's like infinity different worldviews. So how are you going to invalidate all of them? And then you said, oh, I don't really need to do that. I just can like invalidate them by appealing to like the truth of the Christian worldview. And that's what I thought you were going to do.
Repeat that last sentence one more time. I didn't catch that. Sorry.
Right. You can either say like, look, I can show why the Christian worldview is true. Therefore, non-Christian worldview is false. Or you can say all non-Christian worldviews are false. And therefore, the Christian worldview is true. You've kind of tried both, right? And I thought we were going to invalidate all the non-Christian worldview stuff, but you kind of abandoned that, right? Or do you still think that you can do that?
I'm still trying to come up with a difference, so I'm trying to grasp what you're saying, and if you could repeat it one more time for me, I appreciate your patience.
Yeah, there's different ways that you can prove the Christian worldview is true, right? Jesus is true. You could show that there's a contradiction, what you call self-refuting, or I forgot the other word, you logically inconsistent. You could show that all the other religions, all the other worldviews, they all have this, what you're calling a logical inconsistency, and what I call a logical contradiction. And therefore, if you got through all of the possible worldviews and you show that there was a logical contradiction, then the only one left, the Christian worldview, would be true, right?
Well, that's when I would actually change. So that's why I wanted to hear your. That's when I would move into what is known as evidentialism. I mean, so I
Okay,
would
so we're
have
abandoning presuppositionalism now?
well, I usually tend to move from presuppositionalism to evidentialism. I mean, because you take. I don't want to ask this. I don't want to ask you a question, but I mean, to even engage and have a rational conversation, you would take empirical evidence, right? I
For
mean, do you
what?
believe for the Christian worldview? Would you actually look at the empirical evidence?
Yeah, I'm open to looking at your empirical evidence for the. Yeah.
Right. So I save
But
that.
I mean, just to be
So
clear, because there are other people on the stage also, and I don't want to like take up all the time. I mean, I'm fine continuing talking, but just to be clear, have we ended the presuppositional portion of the discussion? And it's
no,
fine either way.
I need much
No,
more time, man. No,
you need much more time.
we barely scratched the surface. So
Well, we're gonna circle back, I think, right? I mean, what are we gonna talk about? Stratitude, Noah's Ark, or something like that?
I can tap in if you
no,
want.
that's moving again into evidentialism, and I'm trying to stay on presuppositions right now. So that's why. Remember, I asked you to repeat what you were saying multiple times to make sure that I was grasping you correctly, because I never want to set a straw man for my opponent. I want to make sure I got their position clear. So, I mean, I was given multifaceted, but if we just let's stick back to objective morality, right? And the fact of the matter is that there is an objective consensus for right and wrong. Would you agree
A
with those statements?
consensus is mind dependent. So, what do you mean by an objective consensus?
I mean that there is saying that consensus is mind dependent still doesn't rule out that it's not objective. Does that make sense?
It would, because it's subjective. It's objectively the case that particular minds have a subjective view, right?
I would say
Like, are
that's
you trying to pull like a, well, it's objectively the case that that's your opinion type thing? Is that what this is?
no, because
No.
you're making the assumption that the morality isn't objective insofar as that it's subjective to the person. In my worldview, it's objective because God has put it on the hearts and minds of men. So even though it's independent to the person, which you're calling subjective, there's a broader sense where it's monolithic, which makes it objective.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to hog the stage. Is there anyone who
Hello, Tom.
wants to